What kind of man says nothing when his wife mocks him in front of his best friend? How could he stay calm, then destroy me without raising his voice? I thought I'd won when he walked away that night, but silence can be the sharpest weapon of all. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Isolde Fenn, and people keep telling me I brought this on myself. Maybe I did. But honestly, I was just joking. It happened at a rooftop bar after too many drinks and too much teasing. Eli, my husband's best friend, was sitting beside me, laughing about something stupid, and I said, "Well, at least you know how to satisfy a woman." Everyone laughed. It was light, funny, quick. Except Caleb. He just went quiet, set down his drink, and left. No scene, no shouting, just silence. At first, I thought he'd cool off. He always does. Caleb's the calm type, the one who double-checks locks and files taxes early. He never yells, never slams doors. So, when he didn't come home that night, I figured he was trying to make a point. I told myself he was being dramatic, that he'd come back when he realized how ridiculous it all sounded. But the next morning, he was up early, dressed, organized. His voice was calm, too calm. He said he had a personal meeting downtown. He even packed a folder. I asked what it was for, and he said, "Just keeping things in order." That should have scared me, but it didn't. I rolled my eyes and said he was overreacting. I told my sister Clara what happened, and she said it was a bad look but not worth panicking over. I agreed. I thought if I laughed it off online, people would forget. So I posted a joke about men who can't take a little humor. It got likes fast. For a moment, I felt in control again. But Caleb didn't comment, didn't even text. He just kept getting quieter. And now I understand. His silence wasn't shock. It was preparation. It started at Eli's birthday party, on the rooftop bar where the lights were low and the music made everything feel looser than it should. I hadn't meant to say it, not really. It just came out between laughter and glasses clinking. Someone had joked that Eli could talk his way out of anything, and I said, "Of course he can. He's good at everything, even satisfying women." Everyone laughed, including Eli, awkwardly, but Caleb just stared at me, that kind of stillness that shuts the room down. He didn't say a word, just pushed his chair back and left. I shouted after him that it was a joke, but he kept walking. People around us whispered, and I forced a laugh. I said he was too sensitive, that he couldn't take a bit of humor. Inside, though, I felt something twist. Eli tried to lighten the air. He said, "You might want to text him." I said, "He'll be fine." But Eli looked uncomfortable. "He's my friend, Isolde," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have said that." I waved him off. "Oh, please, it's not like I meant it." But as the night went on, I realized no one was laughing anymore. They were watching me. When I finally got home, Caleb wasn't there. No note, no message, nothing. His shoes were gone from the hallway, but his wedding ring was still in the dish by the door. That detail bothered me. The ring left behind like a receipt. I texted him, "Are you really mad over a joke?" No reply. I sent another, "Don't be childish." Still nothing. At midnight, I called Eli. "You talked to him?" I asked. He said, "Yeah, he texted. Said he needed space." I said, "So dramatic." Eli didn't laugh. He didn't sound angry, he said. He sounded finished. I didn't like that word. Finished. The next morning, Caleb came home early, quiet as ever. I stood at the counter, trying to sound normal. "You left the party without saying goodbye," he said. "There was nothing left to say." I laughed awkwardly. "You're not still upset?" He said, "You humiliated me, Isolde." I said, "It was a joke. Everyone knew that." He said, "Everyone laughed because they pitied me." That shut me up for a second. Then I said, "You're overreacting." He didn't argue. just poured coffee, checked his phone, and said, "I have a meeting downtown at 9:25. I asked, "Work?" He said, "Personal." That word again, personal. The way he said it made me uneasy. He left, calm, composed. I watched from the window as he drove off. Later, I told Clara what happened. She said, "You really said that? In front of everyone?" I said, "It wasn't that bad." She said, "Well, it sounds bad." I said, "He's too stiff. If he can't take a joke, that's on him." She sighed. "Still, maybe apologize." "I will," I said, "when he stops acting like a saint." That evening, Caleb came home carrying groceries. He put them away in silence. I asked, "Still mad?" He said, "Still thinking." I said, "About what?" He said, "About who you are when people are watching." I laughed, but it came out thin. "You're turning this into philosophy now." He didn't answer, just wiped the counter and went upstairs. That night, I noticed something strange. On his desk sat a small folder labeled Home. Inside were copies of bills, bank statements, even old insurance forms. I asked, "Why are you organizing this now?" He said, "It's good to be ready." "Ready for what?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just looked at me, then back at the folder. I told myself it was harmless. He's an accountant after all. Order calms him. But later, as I tried to sleep, I heard the faint hum of the printer downstairs. A single page sliding out. Then nothing. The next day, I went to work. Dinah, my coworker, asked, "So what really happened at the party?" I said, "Nothing. People are exaggerating." She smirked. "You did make the poor guy blush." I said, "He's not poor, he's dramatic." She laughed. "You always say that when you're in trouble." I shrugged. He'll get over it. When I got home, Caleb was already there. He was sitting at the table with his laptop open. The screen showed a spreadsheet, names, dates, and small notes beside them. I asked, "What's that?" He closed it instantly. "Work," he said. I said, "You never hide your work before." He said, "I do now." Something about his calm voice made me nervous. I wanted him to shout, to show he cared. Instead, he was cold, polite. I said, "You're acting like I cheated on you." He said, "You made people believe I can't satisfy my own wife." I said, "So what? It's just words." He said, "Words are what people remember." Then he stood up and went to bed. I stayed downstairs, replaying everything in my head. I thought about Eli's face that night, embarrassed, guilty. I thought about the way Caleb's voice never rose. It felt like waiting for a storm that refused to come. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed again. His phone sat on the nightstand, buzzing with a new notification, meeting, personal. I read the screen and frowned. He had more than one of those reminders lately. Later, when he came home, he seemed almost lighter. He set his phone face down, hung his coat, and said, "I'm going to handle things properly." I said, "Properly? What does that even mean?" And he said, "You'll see." That night, I called Dina. "He's scaring me," I said. She laughed. "Please. He's probably pretending to be mysterious so you'll feel guilty." I said, "He's not pretending. He's planning." She said, "Then maybe you should plan too. Post something online. Let people see your side first." I hesitated. But she was right. If people were whispering, I needed to control the story. So I opened my phone, took a photo of myself holding a wine glass, and typed, "Men who can't take a joke should stick to numbers, not feelings." Within minutes, it got likes, heart emojis, comments from old friends saying, "You're hilarious," and facts. For a moment, it felt good again, like I was winning. But when Caleb came downstairs, he saw the post and didn't even blink. He just walked past me, picked up his mug, and said, "That's public, you know." I said, "So?" He said, "Good. Then so is what comes next." He left the mug on the counter, half full, and went upstairs. A few seconds later, I heard the faint sound of a drawer closing. Soft, deliberate, final. I told myself it meant nothing, but something about the quiet afterward felt like a countdown. The next morning, Caleb was gone before I woke. The bed was cold on his side, smooth like he hadn't even turned in it. I made coffee, poured 2 cups out of habit, and then remembered he'd stopped drinking with me. His mug sat alone on the opposite counter again, his little symbol of separation. I hated that he was calm. If he'd just yelled once, I could have fought back, but the silence made me look like the crazy one. At work, Dina greeted me with that smirk she always wears when she knows gossip is brewing. "So," she said, "the famous rooftop joke is making rounds." I rolled my eyes. "People love drama." She leaned in. "Caleb's best friend unfollowed you last night." I froze for a second. "Eli?" I asked. "Seriously?" She nodded. "Guess he's trying to look loyal." I tried to sound indifferent. Whatever. I barely talked to him anyway. But deep down, it stung. He'd laughed at the joke, hadn't he? At lunch, Clara called. "Isolde, you need to take that post down," she said. "It's all anyone's talking about." I said, "It's just humor. People are too sensitive." She said, "It's humiliating him." I said, "He humiliated himself by sulking." After work, I came home to find the dining table completely cleared. All the bills and receipts that used to clutter it were gone. In their place sat 3 neatly stacked folders: home, bank, and school. I flipped one open and saw copies of everything: utilities, taxes, even my own credit card statements. "You've been busy," I said when Caleb walked in. He said, "It's important to have records." I said, "You're treating our marriage like a business audit." He said, "Better to know where things stand." I laughed. "You're really that offended by a joke?" He didn't look up. "It stopped being a joke when you posted about it." I said, "You can't tell me what I can or can't say." He said, "I don't have to. The internet already did." That night, I couldn't help checking my phone again. The post had over 200 likes now, but also a few comments that made my skin crawl. He deserves better. Embarrassing. Someone had even tagged Caleb's work profile. When I went upstairs, the printer was humming again. I opened the door just in time to see him slide a paper into a folder. "What are you printing?" I asked. He said, "Summaries." "Of what?" "Things I don't want to forget." I said, "You're insane." He said, "I'm patient." The next morning, a text from Dina lit up my phone. "You're trending on a local gossip page." I clicked the link. Someone had screenshotted my post and paired it with a blurry picture of me at the rooftop bar. The caption read, "She humiliated her husband in front of his best friend and calls it comedy." My stomach turned. I scrolled through the comments. Strangers calling me cruel, some calling me brave, others disgusting. I slammed the phone down and called Dinah. "This is getting out of hand," I said. She said, "Then make another post. Tell your side properly." I said, "I already did." She said, "Then do it bigger. Don't look scared now." When Caleb got home that evening, I tried to act unbothered. I said, "You'll never guess, I'm viral." He didn't even flinch. "I know," he said. "My colleagues sent it around." I froze. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing," he said. "They can see enough." I wanted to shout that he was making me look bad, but I knew it wasn't him, it was me. Still, I couldn't admit that. Instead, I said, "You're just enjoying this." He said, "No one enjoys watching a car crash." I said, "Wow, poetic." He said, "No, factual." That night, we ate in silence. He barely touched his food. I watched him, waiting for any flicker of emotion. When he finally spoke, it was soft. "You've been talking a lot lately," he said. I said, "At least I talk." He said, "Some things sound better when left unsaid." I snapped, "Like how dull you've been for years." He looked at me for a long time, then nodded. "Thank you for confirming what I already knew." He stood, rinsed his plate, and went upstairs. The next morning, Noah came down half awake, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, why are people saying mean things about you on the internet?" I froze. "What?" He said. "Some kids at school showed me your picture. They said Daddy's sad." I laughed too quickly. "People online lie, honey. Don't believe everything." He said, "Daddy said truth always shows up." That hit me harder than it should have. When I got to work, Eli was waiting outside. "Can we talk?" he said. I said, "About what?" He said, "You've made this messy for both of us." I crossed my arms. "Oh, please, you love the attention." He said, "Not like this. Caleb thinks I encouraged you." I said, "Then tell him you didn't." He said, "He won't listen." I smirked. "Then maybe he's not as calm as he looks." Eli sighed. "You think you're still in control, but you're not." I said, "You're all overreacting." He shook his head and walked away. That night, I found Caleb sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I asked, "Eli talked to you?" He said, "He apologized." I said, "For what?" He said, "For laughing." I said, "You're pathetic if that's what it takes to make you feel strong." He said, "Strength is knowing when to stop talking." He stood up, walked into the study, and shut the door. A few minutes later, I heard the soft click of a lock. When I knocked, he said, "I'm working." I said, "On what?" He said, "Proof." "Of what?" I asked. "Behavior," he said simply. My heart pounded, but I told myself he was bluffing. Caleb never did anything extreme. He was too reasonable. The next morning, he left earlier than usual. I noticed his phone face down on the counter, its screen lighting up once. Meeting, personal. The time said 13:40. When he came home that evening, he was quiet again. I said, "Still keeping secrets?" He said, "Just keeping order." I said, "You sound like a machine." He said, "Machines don't feel betrayal." I said, "So now I betrayed you? Over a joke?" He said, "It stopped being a joke when the world joined in." He walked upstairs, leaving me in the kitchen with the faint smell of ink from the printer drifting in the air. I followed him halfway up but stopped when I saw the study door light flicker under the frame. It was the same pattern every night. That quiet hum, the shuffle of papers, the measured calm of someone building something they'd never have to explain. That calm scared me more than any shouting ever could. By the weekend, the story had spread beyond my control. Every time I opened my phone, there was a new thread, a new screenshot, a new stranger telling me what kind of woman I was. I tried to laugh about it to Clara, but even she sounded different now, tired, careful. "You should apologize publicly," she said, "before it gets worse." I said, "Apologize for what? For people not understanding sarcasm?" She sighed and said, "Isolde, you're losing the room." She was right. Even my co-workers were whispering. I caught Dinah minimizing a browser tab when I walked past her desk. "What's that?" I asked. She said, "Nothing." I said, "You're reading about me, aren't you?" She looked guilty. "It's everywhere, Izzy. People are sharing it like it's entertainment." I left work early that day, humiliated. When I got home, Caleb was in the living room, watching something on his laptop. I asked, "Is that the video?" He didn't answer, but I could see the reflection on his glasses, footage from the rooftop, someone's phone capturing my face mid-laugh as I teased Eli. My voice was tinny through the speakers, followed by awkward laughter. Then silence. I said, "Who even recorded that?" He said, "Does it matter?" I said, "It's out of context." He said, "It's exactly what happened." I said, "You're loving this, aren't you?" Finally, I'm the villain and you get to be the victim. He said, "I don't need to be anything. The truth does the work." That calm tone again. It infuriated me. I wanted him to throw something, shout, cry, anything to prove he still cared. But all he did was pause the video, close the laptop and say, "You should think before you open your mouth again." I said, "You're threatening me." He said, "No, advising you." That night, I scrolled through every comment section I could find, heart pounding. People who didn't know me were dissecting my life. One said, "Her poor husband should just leave already." Another said, "He deserves better." The worst part was how quiet Caleb stayed through it all. Silence makes guilt louder. When I couldn't take it anymore, I went downstairs. He was in his study again, the faint blue light from the laptop painting his face. I said, "You're making this worse by doing nothing." He said, "Doing nothing is often the right thing." I said, "You're pathetic." He said, "Maybe, but I'm patient." The next day was Eli's farewell lunch. He was transferring to another branch. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I went anyway. It was in a bright restaurant by the river, the kind with glass walls and white napkins. When I walked in, people looked away. Eli's face went pale. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. I smiled sweetly. "I just wanted to wish you luck. We're still friends, right?" He said, "Isolde, please don't." I said, "Don't what? Say goodbye." Someone at another table took a photo. I saw the flash in the window. Eli stood up. "I think you should leave." I said loudly, "Oh, come on, Eli. You weren't complaining that night." The restaurant went silent. Forks stopped clinking. Eli's jaw clenched, his colleagues staring. He said, "You need to stop talking." I said, "You all need to stop pretending like I'm the problem." I walked out, pretending I didn't see the phones recording, but deep down I knew I'd just made everything worse. When I got home, Caleb was waiting. "You went to Eli's lunch," he said. I said, "How do you know?" He said, "It's already online." I said, "Good. Let them see my side." He said, "Your side doesn't exist anymore." I said, "You're enjoying this?" He said, "No, I'm documenting it." That word chilled me. Documenting. He handed me his phone, showing a note app filled with dates and short lines. June 2nd, public insult toward friend. June 3rd, viral post. June 4th, confrontation at restaurant. I said, "You're keeping a diary now?" He said, "A record." I said, "You're insane." He said, "No, I'm careful." That night I tried to sleep, but every sound in the house made me tense. The click of the fridge, the whir of the printer, the faint shuffle of papers. I started checking his drawers while he was in the shower. Inside one, I found a USB stick labeled Archive A. Another one, Archive B. I asked him about them later. He said, "Backup." I said, "For what?" He said, "You'll see." On Sunday, Clara came over with her daughter. She looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. "Mum says you should stop posting," she said. I said, "Why? I'm not the one sneaking around making files." She said, "Isolde, people are saying things about Noah now." I froze. "What things?" "Just that it's sad. That his mom's embarrassing herself." That stung more than anything. "They don't know me," I said. Clara said, "They don't have to. They know what you showed them." Noah walked in, holding his tablet. "Dad's picture is online," he said. "Why are people being mean to him?" I said, "They're not mean. They're confused." He said it'll be okay soon. After they left, I found Caleb outside, cleaning the car. "You told Noah about this?" I asked. He said, "He asked." I said, "You're poisoning him against me." He said, "No, you're teaching him what not to say." I threw the sponge at the ground. "You think you're perfect, don't you?" He said, "No, just consistent." That night, I decided to fix it all. I drafted an apology post, half-hearted but public. Sometimes humor doesn't land the way we mean. I regret hurting anyone. We're working things out. It sounded sincere enough. I waited for Caleb to say something when he saw it. He didn't. He just scrolled past. I said, "You saw my post?" He said, "Yes." I said, "You don't believe me?" He said, "Belief isn't the point anymore." I said, "Then what is?" He said, "Resolution." The next morning, I woke up to a new sound, the shredder humming in the study. I opened the door and saw him calmly feeding papers through. "What are you doing?" I asked. He said, "Cleaning space." "For what?" He said, "For new beginnings." I said, "Stop being dramatic." He said, "You said that before." Then he unplugged the shredder, slid a USB drive into his pocket and said, "I'll be downtown tomorrow morning." I said, "Another personal meeting?" He said, "The last one." I laughed, but my stomach twisted. He wasn't bluffing anymore. When he went to bed, I stayed up watching the faint glow of his phone charging on the nightstand. A message preview blinked for a second before disappearing. Follow-up confirmed, "Bring forms." I told myself it was nothing, just more of his weird routines. But deep down, I knew, whatever he was building, it was almost done. By Monday morning, the photo was everywhere, Caleb walking to his car, folder in hand, the caption reading, "He finally had enough." It wasn't even from someone we knew. Some neighbor must have taken it, posted it, and watched it spread. Strangers turned our marriage into a spectator sport. I tried to call him, but he didn't answer. His messages now showed red receipts without replies. The last thing he'd texted was short, "Handle yourself properly." Clara came over unannounced that afternoon, face pale. "You've lost control of the story," she said. I said, "There's no story. People are bored." She shook her head. "No, Isolde. People love watching someone fall apart." I said, "I'm not falling apart." She looked around our kitchen, at the spotless counters, the empty fruit bowl, the perfectly aligned folders Caleb had left stacked near the coffee machine. "Then why does your house look like he's already gone?" I snapped. "He's just dramatic. He'll come back." She sighed. "He's not coming back, is he? He's collecting evidence. You've humiliated him in front of everyone." I laughed too hard, a sound even I didn't believe. "So now he's a saint?" She said, "No, he's smart, which is worse." That night, I went through every corner of the house looking for proof that she was wrong. His drawers, half empty. The closet, missing his formal jackets. Even the mug on the opposite counter was gone. What kind of man takes his mug but leaves his wife? When I finally found him, he was in the garage, sorting boxes. I asked, "Are you moving out?" He said, "Just sorting things that are mine." I said, "Everything here is ours." He said, "Not anymore." I said, "You can't just decide that." He said, "I can document it." That word again, document. It sounded like the only language he spoke now. I told him, "You're scaring me with this calm act." He said, "It's not an act, it's preparation." I said, "Preparation for what?" He didn't answer, just closed the trunk and walked past me into the house. The next morning, Noah asked where his dad was. "He's been gone early every day," he said. "Is he mad at you?" I said, "No, honey, he's just busy." He said we might move soon. I laughed nervously. "He's joking." Noah frowned. "He doesn't joke much." Later that afternoon, I got a call from Ruth, his mother. She said, "I heard about the photo. You've really done it now." I said, "Nice to hear from you too." She said, "Do you even care what this is doing to my son?" I said, "Your son is making a fool of me, not the other way around." She said, "He's protecting himself. Something you should try for once." I said, "You always hated me." She said, "I pitied you. There's a difference." And then she hung up. I was shaking when Caleb came home that evening. "Your mother called me," I said. He said, "I know. She told me." I said, "So now you're letting her interfere too?" He said, "She's family." I said, "So was I." He looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, "Were." That word hit harder than any argument ever could. I said, "You can't just erase me." He said, "You erased yourself the moment you made us a joke." I wanted to scream, but I bit it back. Instead, I said, "You think being calm makes you righteous? It makes you manipulative." He said, "You confuse peace with weakness. That's why you don't recognize strength when you see it. I said, "You're unbelievable." He said, "That's what you told your sister too, isn't it? That I'm boring, predictable." I froze. "You talked to Clara?" He said, "She called me. Said you were spiraling. I told her I'd handle it properly." I said, "Stop saying that word." He said, "You'll understand it soon enough." That night I heard him in the study again. The faint whir of the printer, the tap of a keyboard, the smell of toner in the air. I crept to the doorway. He had headphones in, eyes fixed on the screen, a spreadsheet open with lines of text. I saw my name on one of the tabs. When I stepped inside, he minimized it instantly. I said, "What are you hiding?" He said, "Nothing you haven't already shown the world." I said, "You're taking notes on me now." He said, "I'm recording history." I said, "History? You make it sound like I committed a crime." He said, "You committed cruelty." I said, "And you're acting like that's the same thing." He said, "It's worse. Cruelty pretends to be funny." I left before I said something I'd regret. The next day, my mother came over. She tried to sound gentle, but she couldn't hide her disgust. "He's filing something, Izzy," she said. "I can feel it." I said, "He wouldn't. He's too logical." She said, "Logic doesn't mean forgiveness." I said, "You're taking his side now." She said, "I'm taking Noah's." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because she was right. That evening, when Caleb came home, I confronted him again. "You're not taking Noah away from me," I said. He said, "No one's taking anyone away." I said, "Then what are you doing?" He said, "Ending something quietly." I said, "You're so proud of yourself, aren't you?" He said, "No, just finished." He walked past me, put his keys on the counter, and started brewing tea like it was any other night. That normalcy felt crueler than shouting ever could. After dinner, Noah came downstairs in his pajamas. "Mom, are we going to live with Grandma?" I said, "Why would you say that?" He said, "Dad said we'd have to pack soon." My throat tightened. "Go to bed, sweetheart." He nodded but hesitated. "Did you really make Dad sad on purpose?" That question broke me. I managed a fake smile and said, "No, baby. It was just a misunderstanding." He nodded slowly and went upstairs. I turned to Caleb. "You're turning him against me." He said, "He's asking his own questions." I said, "You're feeding him answers." He said, "I'm giving him truth." I said, "You're cruel." He said, "Cruel would be staying." For the first time in weeks, I had nothing left to say. He looked at the clock, checked his phone, and said, "I have to go out." I said, "At this hour?" He said, "Yes, downtown." I said, "Another meeting?" He said, "Just one more." Then he left. I stood there in the quiet house, staring at the empty space where his mug used to sit. Every little sign I'd ignored, every folder, every quiet phone call, every blank paper sliding out of the printer, suddenly felt like a confession I hadn't read in time. The hum of the fridge filled the silence. Then, faintly, from outside, I heard the sound of a car starting. His taillights flickered once, red against the night, before disappearing down the street. The next morning felt wrong the moment I opened my eyes. His side of the bed was stripped bare. No pillow, no sheet, just the indentation where he used to sleep. The closet looked thinner, too. Half of his clothes were gone. I tried to steady my breathing, told myself it was just another one of his quiet punishments. He wanted me to panic. He wanted me to feel small. But then I saw something new. A small envelope on my dresser, unsealed, with my name written in his precise handwriting. Inside was a single line. "We'll do this properly." That word again, properly. It had become a threat I didn't understand. I went downstairs. His mug was gone, the counter clear. Only the faint smell of his cologne lingered, mixed with the sharp scent of toner from the printer. I followed it to the study. The desk was empty except for a new folder labeled Archive C. The computer screen glowed with a spreadsheet full of dates and short notes. May 28th, rooftop bar. June 3rd, public argument. June 7th, restaurant outburst. June 9th, Noah's question. He had recorded everything. I slammed the laptop shut and walked out before I screamed. At noon, Clara called. He came to see me, she said softly. I said, "What?" She said, "He wanted to know if you had anywhere else to stay." I laughed. "He thinks he can just push me out of my own house?" She said, "Izzy, he's serious. He's calm in that terrifying way." I said, "He's bluffing." She said, "No, he's preparing." That word again. I hung up. Later, I drove to his office. The receptionist looked uncomfortable when she saw me. "Is he in?" I asked. She said, "He's out. Meeting. Personal." Of course. Always that word. When I got home, a car I didn't recognize was parked outside. A man in a grey suit stepped out, holding a clipboard. He asked, "Mrs. Fenn?" "Yes," I said, heart pounding. He smiled politely. "I'm here for Mr. Fenn. He asked me to collect some documents." "What documents?" He said, "you'd know." I didn't, but I nodded anyway. "He's not here," I said quickly. "That's fine," the man replied. "He'll follow up." Then he left, calm as Caleb himself. When I went inside, the kitchen looked too clean. Every trace of him had been erased with precision. Even the photo from our wedding, the one that always sat on the shelf, was gone, only a faint square of dust left behind. That night, Noah was quiet during dinner. "Dad said we'll go to Grandma's next week," he murmured. I froze. "He said that?" He nodded. "He said it's better for everyone." I forced a smile. "Just for a little while, right?" He shrugged. He didn't say. After Noah went to bed, I sat in the living room, scrolling through social media, searching for some sign of Caleb. He'd deleted every photo of me. Our anniversary post, family trips, even the one of Noah's first day of school. It was like I never existed. I posted something impulsive. Some people build walls because they can't handle real emotion. It got a few pity likes. Clara texted immediately, "Delete that, now." I ignored her. Around midnight, I heard the garage door. My heart leapt. I thought he'd come back. I rushed downstairs, but it was only him retrieving something from the trunk. He didn't even look surprised to see me. "You're home," I said. "Not really," he replied. I said, "What's that in your hand?" He said, "Records." I said, "You're obsessed with records." He said, "Records are proof. Proof keeps emotion from rewriting history." I said, "You sound insane." He said, "No, Isolde, you sound afraid." He turned to leave, but I blocked the door. "You can't just walk away from your family." He looked at me for a long moment and said quietly, "You turned this family into an audience." I shouted, "I was joking." He said, "So was everyone who laughed at me online." He stepped around me, set a folder on the counter, and said, "You'll get clarity soon." I said, "Clarity about what?" He said, "About what properly means." He walked out, closing the door softly behind him. The sound of that latch felt final. The next day, my mother came by with groceries. She took one look at me and said, "He's already gone, isn't he?" I said, "He's bluffing." She shook her head. "Your father used to do the same thing. Quiet, patient, and when he left, he never came back." I snapped, "So you're on his side now too?" She said, "I'm on the side that still has a roof." She cooked while I sat there, staring at the counter where his folders used to be. When she left, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. Quiet men are dangerous, not because they're cruel, but because they're deliberate. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house felt loaded: the refrigerator hum, the faint creak of the ceiling, the wind tapping the windows. I got up and checked his study again. Empty drawers. One folder left behind, labeled Utilities. Inside were copies of every bill in my name, but nothing else. On the very last page, a single sticky note: Bring forms. I stared at those two words until the letters blurred. At dawn, I saw headlights sweep across the wall. I rushed to the window, but it wasn't his car. Just the neighbor leaving early. I laughed bitterly at myself. Around noon, Clara called again. "He's at the notary," she said quietly. I said, "You're spying for him now?" She said, "No, the notary's my client." She mentioned his name. I said, "What's he doing there?" She said, "You know what he's doing." I ended the call. When I went to pick up Noah from school, the teacher hesitated before letting him out. "Is everything okay at home?" she asked. I forced a smile. "Of course." "Why?" She said, "Noah mentioned something about moving. He said his dad's taking care of it." I laughed softly. Kids imagine things. She didn't look convinced. That evening, Caleb returned briefly, dressed in the same calm neutrality that had begun to haunt me. "You've been busy," he said, glancing at my untouched dinner. I said, "You've been invisible." He said, "That's intentional." I said, "What do you want, Caleb?" He said, "Order." I said, "You can't fix a marriage with paperwork." He said, "This isn't about fixing it. It's about closing it properly." I whispered, "You can't mean that." He met my eyes. "I do, and I'll make sure everything's handled cleanly. I owe you that much." I said, "You think you're being noble?" He said, "No, I'm being done." He picked up the last folder, checked its contents, and tucked it under his arm. Then he said, "You'll be notified soon." I said, "Notified of what?" He paused at the door. "Of what happens when silence becomes evidence." The door closed with that same soft finality I'd come to dread. I stood frozen in the quiet kitchen until my phone buzzed with a new notification. Calendar reminder, downtown 16:05. It wasn't mine. I stared at the screen, realizing it was synced from his old account. The day the papers came was so ordinary, it almost felt cruel. The sun was soft through the kitchen blinds, the air smelled faintly of toast, and for a brief second, I thought maybe things were back to normal. Noah was at school, and I was scrolling through old photos of us. Caleb smiling, my hand on his shoulder, pretending it all still meant something. Then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door, half ready to scold a delivery driver for another wrong package. But instead, a man in a dark blue suit stood there, holding an envelope. He had a polite smile, detached, rehearsed. "Mrs. Fenn?" he asked. "Yes?" I said, my throat dry. He nodded, handed me the envelope, and said, "You've been served." For a moment, I didn't understand the words. Served what? I stood there, frozen, while the man walked calmly back to his car. My fingers tore at the paper before my mind caught up. Inside were clean, heavy sheets printed in perfect black type. Petition for dissolution of marriage. My knees nearly gave out. I leaned against the doorframe, skimming words that didn't feel real. Custody, temporary possession, separation of assets. There was a schedule attached, lists of dates, account names, my own social media posts cited as public conduct. He'd catalogued everything, every word, every photo, every time I'd tried to humiliate him. The front door was still open when his car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out, calm as always, holding another envelope. He looked at me, not with anger, just completion. "You've read it?" he asked quietly. I said, "You really did it." He said, "I told you I would handle it properly." I said, "You can't just erase me like this." He said, "You erased yourself." I said, "Over a joke?" He said, "Over a pattern." I wanted to shout, to claw at him, to make him react, but he was stone. "You're destroying our family," I said. He said, "I'm preserving what's left of it." He handed me the second envelope. Inside was another form, temporary custody order. Child to reside with petitioner until court review. I said, "You're taking Noah from me?" He said, "No, I'm taking responsibility." I said, "You think I'm unfit?" He said, "I think you're unstable." The word sliced through me. You've planned this for months. He nodded slightly. Since the night you turned my life into a punchline. I said, you could have talked to me. He said, you only listen when there's an audience. The wind lifted the edges of the papers in my hands, rattling them like brittle leaves. I could see the neighbors watching from across the street, curtains shifting, silhouettes frozen. Caleb noticed too, but he didn't care. He was past shame. I said, you told them, didn't you? Your mother, your friends, everyone. He said, no. They found out the same way the world did. You made it public. I said, and you waited until I looked small enough. He said, no. I waited until I was sure I wouldn't look angry. I felt the sting of tears but refused to cry. I'd made fun of his control for years, and now it was the weapon he used to cut me cleanly out. Where's Noah? I whispered. With my mother, he said. Just for now. I said, you can't do this, I'll fight you. He said, you'll try, but everything's already documented. He walked past me into the house, moving like he owned every inch of air inside it. He went to his study, opened the drawer, and took out one last USB stick. He placed it gently on the table. This is the record, he said. If you ever doubt what happened, read it. I said, you're cruel. He said, no, I'm thorough. He turned to leave, but I grabbed his arm. Do you even love me? I demanded. He looked at me, eyes calm, almost kind. I did, he said, until you turned love into proof. Then he walked out. No slam, no final word, just the soft click of the door. I sank onto the floor, clutching the papers. My hands shook so badly I could barely focus, but one page caught my eye, a list of supporting exhibits. Under it were the file names. Public comment thread 1, restaurant incident, video rooftop. He'd catalogued my downfall like a historian. I wanted to destroy it all, burn every file, every trace. But even as I thought it, I knew it was useless. The evidence wasn't just in his folders. It was everywhere. Screenshots, reposts, whispers. An hour later, I drove to his mother's house. Noah was playing in the front yard, his small hands building a tower of plastic bricks. He looked up, smiling. Mom, he called, running toward me. But Ruth stepped outside before he reached me. Not now, Isolde, she said softly. I just want to talk to him. You can. After this settles. Settles? Like it's a business transaction. Ruth sighed. You made it one the moment you performed your marriage in public. I said, you think this is my fault? She said, I don't think. I know. I wanted to scream, but Noah's small face was watching. I swallowed hard. I'll see you soon, baby, I said, forcing a smile. He nodded uncertainly. When I drove away, my reflection in the rearview mirror looked hollow. I barely recognized the woman who once thought every fight was a performance, every emotion an audience waiting to clap. Back home, the house felt sterile. The silence was heavy, absolute. I sat at the table staring at the last sticky note still stuck to the fridge. Bring forms. It had always been there, right in front of me, and I never noticed. I thought about every warning I'd ignored, the folders, the quiet calls, the printer humming at midnight. He hadn't been planning revenge. He'd been planning freedom. As dusk fell, I heard the faint hum of the printer again. My heart jumped. For a second, I thought he'd come back. But when I went to the study, the room was empty. The printer had simply finished a queued document, one last blank page sliding out and curling onto the tray. I stood there, staring at it, the machine still warm. The front door creaked open, one of the hinges loose from years of slamming. Footsteps echoed softly in the hall. My pulse quickened until I realized it wasn't him. Just a delivery again. Another envelope. Inside, notice of hearing, family division, downtown, 9:25. I read it twice, then 3 times, but the words didn't change. My signature was required within 7 days. My response, my defense, my chance, if I had one. I sat at his desk, staring at the neat row of USB sticks. The labels were perfect, his handwriting even. Archive A, Archive B, Archive C. Evidence of a man who never raised his voice but somehow tore my world apart with preparation. I looked around the study, the one room he'd kept closed off, and saw now that it was never about anger. It was about conclusion. The last thing he said echoed in my head. "You'll be notified soon." He hadn't lied. I picked up the hearing notice, pressed it flat against the desk, and for the first time in my life, I had no words left. Outside, a car horn sounded distantly. The house stayed still. The printer light blinked one last time before fading out. And then there was only silence, the kind that isn't peace, but the echo of everything you refuse to hear. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.